and this is Lori Horvitz, the Invisible Children and Digital Activism Advisor. We would like to thank you all for being with us this afternoon. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's panel, as well as the coordinator for this event, Sophia Amen. And if you could please turn off your cell phones. Thank you.
I would like to welcome everyone to this Half the Sky screening and discussion that was made possible through the help of Dr. Chermak, the Youth Upper School Administration, and the Inter-American Center for Human Rights at NSU. My name is Sophia Alman, and I'm a 10th grader. Recently, I became one of the first high school campus ambassadors for Half the Sky, a nonprofit organization which focuses on the oppression of women around the world. Issues including maternal mortality, gender-based violence, economic empowerment, education, forced prostitution, and human trafficking. Last year, I was given the opportunity to conduct a research project on the topic of my choice. I decided to do research on human trafficking, an issue that not many people know about. I realized that this is something that happens so often in today's society, yet so few people realize it. After many weeks of research, my teacher at the time, Ms. Horvitz, recommended I read the book Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide. The organization of today's event is just one of the many responsibilities I have as a Half the Sky ambassador. After watching the 40-minute condensed version of the original 2-part, 4-hour series that aired on PBS, we will be having a discussion with 5 exceptional guest panelists. We will now begin the screening. First, we have Adriane Reesey, the President and Chair of the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition, Carmen Ramirez, Child Advocate for the organization Women in Distress, which is dedicated to stopping domestic violence abuse for everyone through intervention, education, and advocacy, Julie Chaikin Hogan, Deputy Statewide Prosecutor for the Office of Statewide Prosecution. She's been handling human trafficking cases for over a year now. Professor Florence Shu-Acquaye, NSU Law Professor, who on her sabbatical year in 2006 worked in Cameroon with the Society for Women and AIDS in Africa, an African organization dedicated to addressing the problems faced by women with HIV/AIDS. And Dr. Concannon Mannise, Assistant Professor of Writing at NSU, and an active member of multiple community literacy and community outreach projects, including the South Florida Diversity Alliance, the Women of Tomorrow program, the College Brides Walk, and No More Tears project, which assists survivors of domestic violence. How widespread is the problem of human trafficking in South Florida and the U.S. in general?
Well, unfortunately for us here in South Florida, we are recognized and acknowledged as the number 3 spot in the country as far as this area in and of itself. The issue with human trafficking is that it's a huge and very complex crime. One that's not just domestic, but it's also international. It encompasses children, it encompasses adults, women, men, even boys. So it's a huge criminal enterprise as well.
What kind of laws do we have in Florida and the federal level to address human trafficking?
Typically, these types of cases were prosecuted at the federal level because the state laws were so weak. Over the during last year's legislation, there were some laws that were passed in Florida, making it much more easily prosecuted at a state level. The level of offense and the degree of felony changed so that what once was a second-degree felony or a felony that could be sentenced up to 15 years in prison is now a first-degree felony, so the maximum sentence would be 30 years in prison. Also, when there is an individual who's under the age of 17, it's a first-degree felony punishable by life, and if you're under 14, it's become a life felony, meaning you're sentenced to life if you're convicted. So the penalties have been strengthened tremendously from the past. The federal government has been actively pursuing the cases, but at this point, the state laws in Florida really mirror the federal laws. So the problem with prosecuting the cases isn't so much the penalties at this point, but it's getting the individuals to actually testify and getting them prepared to testify, which is where it becomes so important that there be communication between law enforcement, the prosecution, and the community.
What are some of the circumstances that lead to women and young girls in particular becoming victims of human trafficking in South Florida?
Sadly, we're a transient state, so we have a lot of population that are coming in and out. So we have a lot of girls being trafficked into this area since it attracts a lot of business. But also look at the vulnerable population, the runaway teens, the teens that don't have good support, the teens that might be recruited by other teens. So there's a lot of, and the individuals that recruit kids know where the kids hang out. They know where the runaways go to. They know where Covenant House is. So they know these key points where youth are going to hang out, and they know that they can get kids that don't have a place to stay, that are couch surfing, and these are the kids that they can normally be at risk of being recruited into this. Also kids who have high risk violence in the home, parents who possibly have been in the system. Those kids are very vulnerable as well. And we know that usually a child that runs away, and Amanda, you can correct me because I know you're in the audience, within 48 hours, someone has contacted that youth that could potentially be at risk of being recruited or coerced into trafficking.
And the average age of entry into prostitution is 12 years old, and that's the average age, which means that there are kids on this side and on this side. And the whole point of human trafficking is not one necessarily of sex, because you also have for labor trafficking. It is about greed. It is about money. Make no mistake, this is not about people. When you heard the terms in the film expendable, that's exactly what it is. These folks are looked at as nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold on an open market. And that's what happens. The bad guys kind of figured out that selling people was extremely profitable. And what they did was they figured out, well, you know, if I sell someone drugs, those drugs are gone. I've used them up, they're gone. If I sell this to you, it's gone. And I assume all the risk in selling that. But if I decide that I'm going to sell you to you, I step back, I collect the money, and then this individual assumes all the responsibility and assumes all the liability and will be the person potentially to go to jail and suffer the consequence. Not to mention the fact that this is gone, whereas this individual that all I'm looking at is a commodity is one that I can sell over and over and over until that individual is used up. So there's so many things that these guys exploit, and I say guys, but I don't just mean that, because we know that there are women and there are young people who also will solicit folks into a life of trafficking. But this is about greed, and it truly is a crime that touches everyone. So, sorry to jump in like that.
Yeah, that's what a discussion is. What are some of the similarities and differences between human trafficking in the U.S. and countries discussed in the documentary, maybe?
I think human trafficking is similar, everywhere in the world, in the sense that the whole idea is to sell people to get some money or use them during conflict, children during conflicts and so forth. But I think it's pretty much the same principle behind human trafficking. But in the international arena, more so in Africa, with which I'm very familiar, it's principally due to many factors. Poverty, of course, is paramount in terms of where, like you saw in the documentary, where someone has to go out and fend for themselves. The father was having the daughter try to fend for herself by having herself lottery tickets. So because of the lack of means of poverty, sometimes people find themselves in a situation where they have to go out and do other things in order to get money, and prostitution becomes one that is very top of the list because they're just vulnerable to it, but the men out there willing to do that.
Most of the time, the men who come to Cambodia to abuse children in Cambodia have oftentimes abused children in their own country. And one of the startling things there is it says that the #1 destination in the world to have sex with a child is the United States. You would think that it would be a third world country. You would think that it would be another outside of our scope, but it is not. The #1 country and #1 destination is the United States.
I'm sorry, think about the vulnerable youth. How many kids out there in the audience know kids that are fending for themselves, that don't have any support? Where they came to you or they came to a teacher, who knows who to call, who's going to support this youth that is out there supporting themselves, who's a prime victim for being recruited into the industry, who we think of it as, oh, it's happening someplace else, but think about the youth that we know that don't have any support, that don't have anyone, that go to school, that work, that take care of themselves. These are the kids that fall prey to this industry.
And we have a whole nother element to this, which is the social networking aspect and the whole Facebook. I mean, I've run into people all the time who, and especially under the age of 18, who say, I know every one of my 2,876 closest friends on Facebook. And the interesting thing is, they may not know them, or they may see a photograph and they may say, well, I think I know this person, I think I know who this is, it might be somebody I go to school with. And oftentimes we find that kids are lured via the internet. And by the way, when I say kid, I mean anybody under the age of 40, because I'm over 40, so anybody under the age of 40 to me is a kid. But they're truly lured through this social networking, and there are cases, even here, where someone is lured through that medium, through like a Twitter or a Facebook or a MySpace or any one of those social networking sites. And it's true. And if you think that you are immune, I just have to say that that's what we're here to talk about, is empowerment and understanding that you are not necessarily immune. There are three very, very powerful words that can be uttered that can make you less immune, which are, I love you. Some people have never heard that growing up. Some people find that those terms, those words are ones that they'll do anything for.
How widespread is it, number-wise? How many children under the age of 18 are being forced to work in houses of prostitution in Florida or in South Florida? And two, why isn't the local government doing more? Is there a fear of getting of some sort of backtracking or some sort of the government itself having a fear from the bad guys?
First of all, it's a crime that's very, very difficult in its nature to give you numbers. We have just begun to get statistics, if you will, and starting to look at things. But in our opinion, one is too many. And when you're looking at South Florida in and of itself, I know that without going into too much, there are many staffings that take place of youth that are involved in, people who have been involved in human trafficking. Can I give you a specific particular number? No, but I will say, and I'm going to pass it to Julie, that the government isn't necessarily afraid. This is just something that we're dealing with, that we're catching up a little bit, but we are definitely not afraid of pursuing it and not afraid of pursuing traffickers to 1,000% of our capabilities.
What I can tell you is, at a federal level, they pursued these cases in the past. In the state level, you wouldn't have seen it as a human trafficking, because the laws were so weak that they would be prosecuted under different theories of prosecution, such as racketeering, perhaps, or prostitution rings, organized schemes to defraud. There were split statutes that the state would prosecute these cases under, so it wouldn't be called human trafficking. And just by way of an example, I've been a prosecutor for 22 years, and until Pam Bondi, who's the Attorney General, who's ultimately my boss, made this one of her initiatives, I really was not aware of human trafficking. I was aware of the crimes involved with human trafficking that are now called human trafficking, but I had never had a human trafficking case. One had never been presented to me. It just wasn't something that there was an awareness of in that terminology. I think that what I've seen over the last couple of years and through the legislative process and nationally, actually, there's this huge push for awareness in the human trafficking front. And that's I get Googles every day. I have a search, and I get a Google search on human trafficking. I get an alert every day that gives me all the news on human trafficking. And there is legislation being passed in every single state in this country right now. There is a huge push nationally to create awareness of this issue and this problem. So I don't necessarily think that it's the government being threatened or the government not being wanting to pursue this. I think really it was an issue of awareness, and I think that once the attorney generals, not just the one in Florida, but the attorney generals throughout the country made this a very big issue, you see the ripple effect and the impact on every state in the country.
And with that, we're not just talking about children either. There was recently a law passed with regards to massage parlors. And they will no longer be open between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And I don't know if you noticed the proliferation of massage parlors, usually Asian/Oriental massage parlors. But that has been addressed. We are definitely dealing with that issue as well.
Going back talking about awareness, I think once the case is identified and the victim is worked with, and she's got the support that she needs in order to work, so it can be brought to trial. Broward County, Miami-Dade attorneys are prosecutors are eager to go after these cases, and the victims get a lot of support. I think we need to become better aware of recognizing, is this potentially a victim of trafficking, whether it's a minor or an adult? We need to become better at identifying this is a potential case, and what can we bring to this person so that they know that if they wanted to report it, or again, if it's a minor, you have to report it now. So now that we're in school, you do have to make an abuse report if you have any knowledge that a child may be a victim of trafficking. So that's now goes to an 896 abuse call, which now then via so much as people can begin an investigation. So that didn't used to be. So awareness is key once to identify who's a potential person that's being trafficking, and then it goes on from there.
And with the awareness, I don't only work at Broward Sheriff's Office as a community involvement specialist, but I also, as I was introduced, as the president and chair of the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition. And with that coalition, one of the hallmarks is an awareness campaign. There are subcommittees within the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition that cover 0 to 18 years old, 18 to whatever age, and then there's a law enforcement subcommittee as well. There's also a faith-based subcommittee. And each one of those subcommittees are tasked with developing white papers and policy and what's going to be most beneficial to get the word out. But of course, sometimes you're limited by virtue of the fact that, campaigns sometimes take money to do. But it's an internet predominantly right now driven. We have over 3,000 active members with the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition. And at any one given time, between 60 to 80 come to the meetings. And it's a good forum for people to be able to ask questions, network, and get more information, because generally we have people who will give us presentations, such as the prosecutor's office, or CFIS, or Women in Distress. Any of these entities may come and give a presentation about what they do with these issues as well. And it's truly educating the public. When you leave here today, you can make an impact by speaking to somebody who didn't know that this existed, by talking to someone else who had said, I saw this thing on human trafficking today, and it was really interesting. You then perpetuate the awareness, and you then are a purveyor of the message, which helps us to be able to do our jobs.
You spoke before a lot about the group that is at risk in South Florida is a lot of the young kids who are runaways, who basically these people know where they are. I'd like to know, is this really the only group that is really at risk, or basically anybody at any place, any time could be at risk for human trafficking?
I think all kids are at risk. They can go to the regular hangouts. Kids are not isolated beings. If my kid's hanging out at X place, and X place is being visited by X pimps trying to recruit kids, our kids are vulnerable. They can get to that particular child, they can get to ours. Not only physically or through recruiting them through another youth, but like she mentioned, through the social media. So if they have access to our kids in the media, they have access to any child. That child is going to run away for that one time because they fought with their mom, or a child that's couch surfing, or a child that's being hit by their own family. So if they can get to one of our kids, they can figure out how to get to any of our kids, any of our youth. So that's why we're up here, because they can affect any of our kids, anyway.
And sometimes it's also the family members who are themselves the traffickers, and that's really very difficult to identify because you're somebody who is entrusted to take care of you as a child.
So any practical tips for us as a community with children who obviously, are independent and are out there and go to the arcades or the malls or et cetera? Anything we should watch out for, look for? Any practical tips?
For like a parent or anybody out there, I mean, make sure that the kids have a safety plan if they find themselves in a place where they thought they're going to be an ex's house and then later on they go to another house. Have a safety plan. Where are you going to be? Who are you going to be with? I mean, that's what I do with women in distress, is basically safety plan. But have a plan for the night. Who are you going to be with? Who are your safe people who you can go home with? Who are your safe home, contacts? Have them memorize some phone numbers so they can actually call on us if the phone gets lost. Know where your kids are at. If they're going to be on Facebook, make sure that there are conditions to that Facebook, that social media avenue. And talk to them about potentially that there are people at these parties or these places that are recruiting kids for things that are not good. And plainly talk to them about, about the issues of that they sell kids. And they can potentially coerce you or kidnap you for this kind of trafficking and commercial sex.
Understanding though that coercion is, and I think you were going to speak, but coercion is something that's very, very interesting. And when you're saying, how do we keep our children safer, what do we look for? I agree that you have to have a plan, but one of the main things that I would say is have an open line of communication with your kids. Because too often what we see is the kids might say, I'm going to the library, and then they go off in that direction. No intention of going to the library whatsoever, and they land up at a party, and maybe something happens, maybe they drink, and they shouldn't be, but they do. They shouldn't fear being able to call you and say, I'm stuck, I'm having a problem. Too many times we see that the kids they're too afraid to tell their parents, and then they have pictures taken of them when they're in this state, and that's used as blackmail to pull them into something. It's not just an abduction like the movie Taken. It's not that flagrant. It's a coercion. It's pulling that person in, saying those words, I love you, you're so mature. And as a parent, it's so insidious, and it's so difficult. I mean, it's difficult to track your kids and to say, are you on Facebook? And then they go over to their friend, you're limited on Facebook now, and then they go over to their friends, and they're on Facebook. It's hard to limit. So I think an open expression and dialogue is so critical and so important, and knowing that they can come to their parent or come somewhere, that's extremely important. I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, just to add off of that, and really with a lot of the things that you're talking about, just working on cultivating strong self-esteem for young women. I think that really couching these conversations in terms of the good guys and the bad guys. This is happening every day in our classrooms, with our colleagues, with our peers, with our friends. If women are told, or little girls are told, that their sense of identity and self is through what they look like, and if they're pretty, and we see all these different ways that young women are sexualized, of course they're sort of at risk in a way that is really, really problematic. So I think that really working closely with all of these moments of empowerment for young people, young women and men, can really address this issue on a local level.
How many prosecutions, or how many sentencings have there been since this law went into effect for guys or gals who've been involved in trafficking?
How many sentencings in my office alone, or in the state? Florida? I don't know about Florida itself. I can tell you that, to my knowledge, I don't know if you have a better number, but...
Well, I can say that, as Julie was saying, the state has just begun with its prosecutions. But let me just say that there was a gentleman, and I would use that term extremely loosely, in Fort Lauderdale that was just convicted and received 5 life terms. He pimped out youth between the ages of 14 and 17. We just had a situation where another individual was out of Oakland Park sentenced to a life sentence, and the woman that was also running the house was sentenced to 13 years because she flipped on him. But the prosecutions at the federal level, as Julie was saying, they had a little bit of a head start because the TVPA of 2000, which is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, they had a jump start with that. The state is now just getting into this. And I gotta tell you, these cases are extremely complex and they're very, very difficult because oftentimes the victim does not see themselves as a victim. Just like in a domestic violence situation, which I'm sure that Ms. Ramirez can speak to, is, you know, we ask, why didn't they just leave? Why didn't they just go? Well, people will say, well, what are they doing this for? Why are they prostituting themselves? Why are they doing this? It's much more complex than just the issue of quote-unquote prostitution. This person might be in love with their pimp, and he's going to change, and this isn't forever. And I've heard kids say, well, this money is for college, you know, and he's keeping it in the bank for me, and he treats me nicely. He's the only one that ever has. Some kids come from homes where they were sexually abused, and they turn around and they say, well, why shouldn't I get paid for it? Because I was giving it away for free. It's extremely complex as an issue, and the cases are extremely complex. But there are prosecutions, and they are happening right here. And I am proud of the 5 life terms, trust me on that one.
And if I could just add, local law enforcement agencies really never focused on this issue either. So now that we have state and local law enforcement agencies making this a priority, I can tell you there's at least 3 different agencies locally here in Broward County that have created a squad just to investigate these types of cases. Those are the kinds of cases that are going to come to us on a state level for prosecution. And some of the state attorneys who are excellent advocates and pursuing this, I can tell you Miami-Dade is, you know, a jump ahead of a lot of other counties in pursuing these cases. There are other state attorneys in the state of Florida who don't really see the issue yet. So it's disturbing, but it's happening. So my office, which is a statewide office, and we have offices throughout the state, we try and fill those gaps in this issue because it is our initiative, and law enforcement throughout the state is aware of us pursuing these types of cases. And if I could just add, the changes in the laws didn't just provide for stiffer sentences, but there was also a change in the law that provided, it's called the Safe Harbor Act, which provided for the community essentially to get together and work together in establishing safe houses for these victims of human trafficking, and services to be provided, whatever types of services that are necessary, including counseling, education, clothing, the basic necessities. And some of the funding, at some point when we do hopefully sentence these people and recoup funds, there's a portion of the statute that allows for us to forfeit and seize the monies through bank accounts of these traffickers and put that towards these safe houses. So hopefully it will come full circle. And you know what I find very interesting in the legislation is that we are actually legislated to act together. I mean, we as law enforcement, non-governmental agencies, community leaders, community organizations, health agencies, DCF, we're all legislated to work together. We're told we have to. And it is the right thing to do. So I found that interesting that they had to actually tell us that we needed to do that for it to actually happen.
And I know that Christie House in Miami-Dade has opened their first safe house for girls, minor girls, victims of trafficking, and their program is outstanding. They do an amazing outreach, which they're out there in the streets, making sure that the girls know that someone is looking out, that whenever they're ready to come forward, that there's an agency there to support them.
Kidnapping and prostitution and trafficking, you said that they hadn't really prosecuted, or you didn't even learn of that term until recently. And I remember hearing about it once in Berlin about 10 years ago, and they said that the Russian mob was in human trafficking and bringing girls from Bosnia into Germany. Does trafficking, I guess the term legally, does it mean moving people out from a country or an area? Or what's the definition?
Actually, not at all. And that's a very good question. Kidnapping is really moving a person or not allowing them to leave against their will, holding them against their will. So if I don't have to actually move the body for it to be kidnapping. I can hold you in a place, put you in a closet right inside a house, and that could be kidnapping. And human trafficking was part of the kidnapping statute initially. And it was a second-degree felony. The maximum sentence was 15 years. And it was really a subsection, so it wouldn't be the statute that you would look to prosecute under. Prostitution is selling a person for sex. So it's using them as a commodity. Now they've combined the two, where human sexual trafficking is all under the kidnapping, it's under the number of the kidnapping statute. And it's really has to do with the sale of a person. And they change the ages, so we talk about coercion. If you're under the age of 17, the state doesn't have to prove that there was any coercion whatsoever. And that's another interesting fact, because for a sexual battery to take place, the age of 17 is the age of consent. So if you're under 17, you can't consent. But in human trafficking, that never was the case. You were, I guess, able to consent to be trafficked. So now they've taken out that element, so we don't have to prove coercion at all. And then if you're under the age of 14, it's a life felony. If you're sentenced, you get life. So there is distinctions between them all. Prostitution is really when you don't, it's not trafficking, it's not where these people are going against their will, it's when they're willingly selling themselves. So that would not be a person who's under the age of 17. You cannot be a prostitute under the age of 17. If you have the stereotypical idea of a prostitute where you walk into a place and you pay someone for sex, if you're under 17, it is human trafficking. It is human trafficking. That is what statute it will fall under, and that is what one will be prosecuted under. It's a first-degree felony. So the distinction really has to do with willingness at this point. And under 17, you cannot choose. You cannot make that decision.
And there's also a distinction to be made with smuggling, because oftentimes people will confuse trafficking and smuggling. And so that's different areas as well. Although sometimes a trafficking situation in an international perspective may start out as a smuggling situation where someone says, here's my $5,000, I want you to take me to the United States because I understand there's a factory job that I can get. And then when they get to the United States, they take their papers and they leave. That would be a smuggling situation. But a trafficking situation would probably entail a situation whereby the individual pays their $5,000, they come across the United States, the coyote or whoever is transporting them holds their papers, and then when they get to the United States, they say, well, you know what? We've decided that you have a little bit more of a debt to pay, and it's going to be about $25,000 now. Well, how are you going to make that? And by the way, there's no factory job. So that person may be forced into a life of prostitution, and this situation that started as a smuggling situation then becomes a trafficking situation.
And if I could just add on to that with the smuggling issue, prior to the change in the law last year, human smuggling was a misdemeanor. Now it's a third-degree felony, so you could get 5 years in prison for that at the state level.
This event marks the first of many programs that I will be organizing to draw attention to the oppression of women locally and globally. For the next 2 years, I will continue to bring the community together in raising awareness by working with advocates and activists, not only to educate others, but also work on solutions to these critical issues faced by many. Discussions already are underway about making this the theme of next year's Summit on Human Dignity Week. I would like to thank all of our panel members for making this event possible, for providing their knowledge and support. A special thank you to Ms. Reesey, who sent a press release to 11 media outlets. I would also like to express my appreciation to the members of University Schools Amnesty International, Digital Activism for a Change, and Invisible Children. A committee of dedicated club members from these groups helped organize this event. It is a privilege to attend a school that pushes its students to focus on issues that are important to them and gives them the opportunities to make events like these possible. If you would like to learn more about Half the Sky or donate, please visit their website, halftheskymovement.org. Thank you.